Not too long ago, I talked with Dale Bohannon, whom I've known since, I guess, the mid-1980s. And he told me something very interesting that he found back in the fall of 2000 while he was on a business trip. Listen to this, folks.
I was pulled to the side road, which was a new cut gravel dirt road in front of a business, a builder supply business, actually top-notch builder supply in Madison, Georgia. To my right, this was previously was a soybean field, and this little new cut road divided this field, and the right side of the road was filled with which I thought was portable toilets. I never looked at them that close. Same in color, maybe black, but which was an odd color. And I was sitting there going over my notes, and a van pulled alongside of me that turned out to be the property owner. And he greeted me, and he was by himself, and so we had a good little dialogue there, and I asked him about the field of black boxes. What were they? Because I'd never seen anything like that, and his statement was that if he told me, I would be one of few people in Madison, Georgia that knew about them. And he says they're disposable coffins, I believe he told me. And he says there's 100, at that time he said there was 125,000 there. And they were stacked, he told me 15 high. I asked him who owned them, and he stated that the CDC owned them and that they were leasing his land for storage. And he said his brother worked with the CDC in Atlanta and had been asked by the CDC to do a 3-year extension to place temporary morgues all across the nation.
So in January of this year, 2005, we decided to drive to beautiful Madison, Georgia and take a look for ourselves. It was on a Sunday and no one was around, with the exception of this one pickup truck that was coming out the narrow road that we were going in on next to this field. We flagged down the pickup truck, and it was providential that the driver of this pickup truck turned out to be the son of the man that owned this field. So naturally we started asking him questions. And he told us that not long ago there had been as many as 500,000 of these grave liners or disposable coffins. We asked him for permission if we could look around, and he said yes, so we did.
We're just getting an idea for the size of these boxes. What could these boxes be used for? Well, they're called casket liners. And that's an interesting term, isn't it? It's a casket liner. When I first heard the term casket liner, I thought perhaps a lining for a casket. But this is too big to be on the inside of a casket. So certainly this could be used as a casket. This is an inexpensive casket. And you can see the size here. There's lots of room. I think my friends here, we could all probably get inside, and it might be a little cozy, but we'd fit just fine. Which tells me that these liners can be used for more than just one. And one more time, what kind of liners are these?
Casket liners.
These are casket liners.
That's what the man said.
That's what the man told us. And we're told that there are about, well, there were about 500,000 out here.
Later, as I went back to my home office, I spoke of it there, and of course people usually don't want to hear too much about this kind of thing. So it's never been mentioned, publicly, except just here and there. because most, like I said, the reaction I got, people didn't want to know about it, the few people that I spoke to, and so I just dropped it. And till I went to a luncheon, a fundraiser for Representative Saxby Chambliss. He was running for his second term for the U.S. House of Representatives. And it was a crowd, probably 100, maybe 150. It was congressmen, senators, state senators, and mayors. There was one table we probably had 2 3-star generals and a couple of 1-star with their spouses. So it was a real high-powered meeting. But the keynote speaker was a congressman, and I don't remember his name. He'd just been in the House for a long time, and he was the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. And so he just spoke in behalf of Representative Chambliss and the importance of having him on board to be reelected due to our threats. But it had to do with the nuclear devices that was missing from the old Soviet Union and that had gotten into terrorist hands. And it was, the emphasis was on the critical state that we face in this country, and he said we could lose tens of millions of people in the next decade, and he used those terms, due to a nuclear strike on U.S. soil. And I was sitting there, and it became very clear to me that that could very well explain why just weeks, I mean, could be 2 to 3 weeks prior to that meeting, that I had stumbled upon these, at that time, 125,000 disposable liners or caskets or coffins or whatever they could be termed as in that soybean field in Madison, Georgia.
Did you catch what he said, friends? At this high-powered meeting, it was in Perry, Georgia, near Robins Air Force Base, the largest employer in the state of Georgia, Robins Air Force Base. The chairman of the Armed Services Committee was the keynote speaker. The chairman of the Armed Services Committee, whoever that may be, used to be Sam Nunn of Georgia, from the district I was born and raised in. Whoever that chairman is generally one of the most powerful men in Washington. And I can't remember the chairman's name at that time myself, but he said, this was in the year 2000, I believe, that in the next 10 years, possibly due to nuclear strikes, tens of millions of people could lose their lives. And we've just read what our prophet said. Now, what we've just seen is one United States city outside, this is Atlanta, it has a metropolitan population area of roughly 4 million people. So this is one field outside of one U.S. city, and the brother of the man that owns this field, that the government is leasing this field from to store these disposable coffins. This brother was given 3 years to set up temporary morgues around the country. Now, we found the website that we think these disposable coffins were made at, and we noticed that the lids that they're advertising on the website were rounded. But the lids, hundreds of thousands of lids there, the lids we found, folks, were flat, and they were reinforced. You know what that could mean? You can stack them on top of each other. That's a lot neater to stack them in disposable coffins than what we saw after the tsunami, when we would see bulldozers digging holes and taking bodies and pushing bodies into holes. America can stomach this much better.
You know, about maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, I heard a phenomenal testimony on YouTube about 2 U.S. soldiers that got murdered. Basically, they were down in a basement in a military base, and they went into a room that they were not authorized to go into. It's kind of like they were just snooping around. They went into this large room, and what they found was modern day guillotines. And they freaked out, and they started telling people. And within, I don't know, a short period of time, they both wound up dead. And that story got onto the internet. I clearly remember it. But their shocking story is not the only one talking about military bases and guillotines. Why are modern guillotines on military bases throughout North America? Maybe because they plan on killing us. This story comes from a Christian truck driver that delivered a shipment. He happened to look inside of his semi-trailer and probably got the shock of his life. He was delivering modern-day guillotines to a Marine base in Billings, Montana. There is no doubt in my mind that guillotines are being stored in selected military bases. In fact, I absolutely believe that 1 out of 10 U.S. soldiers are wicked, murdering criminals that would have no problem with murdering you and me and the guy down the street. They would have no problem. And there's even bizarre stories about prisoner boxcars, rail cars that have shackles already built into the floors of the boxcars. I do know this: if you get left behind the rapture and you're taken to a FEMA facility or UN soldiers come and take you, don't fear. Say your prayers, get as close to God as you can, and maybe you can be so filled with the Spirit of God that you can smile while they chop your head off. Wouldn't that be the greatest way to die or leave this earth? To smile as they chop your freaking head off. Because when you study up on the Bible and what it has to say about Babylon the Great and the end result of Babylon the Great, and then Hollywood actually puts in their movies the future of America and how they just seem to unpleasantly line up. I mean, if you have not seen this movie, you have to watch this movie. We know that America is Babylon the Great. Okay, it clearly says she's surrounded by many waters. Okay, America is surrounded by many waters. Rome is not surrounded by many waters. The Bible also says that great city Babylon, the great merchants of the earth, will stand afar off in fear and horror at her destruction and all that. Well, guess what? The great merchants of the earth could not go to Rome if their life depended on it, because Rome does not have a deep port harbor. Okay, it's talking about New York City, that great city Babylon, where the kings of the earth meet. Well, the UN headquarters just happens to be in New York City. It's talking about New York City or America. But Hollywood has put in front of your face the end result of America. All the land's going to be burned up. There's going to be cannibalism. You can't grow crops. It's just not possible. The only way to survive is if you have a powerful anointing where you can pray over empty pots and you have food, and you can pray over empty water jugs and you have water. That's the only way you're going to survive. But what I wonder is actually going to kill you with the guillotine. Is it going to be U.S. soldiers or is it going to be the UN soldiers? There's already videos and talk about UN soldiers in Chicago. There's been so many prophetic dreams about the UN soldiers that come flooding into America after the big earthquake splits America in half. And then it's followed by an economic collapse. And then total martial law, and then these UN soldiers, these foreign troops, there might even be 2 million or more that come flooding in as the international help. And they're going to be the ones that most likely try to take your guns or try to take you to FEMA facilities. That's when the shooting is going to occur. There's been other people that have had these dreams and visions where they see fighting against the government right before Russia and China and its allies attack America. And we know it's going to be an antichrist-like government during the time of the invasion. So when you start putting all these together, you can see that it most likely will be under an antichrist-like martial law scenario right before the attack. And the antichrist government that people see that it's going to be set up If you want to get a shocking revelation, come over here to YouTube, type in like Dream Vision Obama Returns to Power, and then you can find this video. Prophetic Dream reveals Obama returning to power with Sister Beverly. When you start it at about 1 hour and 27 minutes. Now, I've listened to this 3 times, all the way through, from an hour 27 all the way, like 2 hours or whatever. But you want to get a shocking revelation, go check out this video. Now, what's so funny about the video, the Lord never told her that Obama is the Antichrist. She just assumes that he is. She had in the vision or dream, she saw where Obama is standing by this very large throne, this evil throne, and it even says Osiris, which is another name for Nimrod. And then she thinks that Obama is the Antichrist. No, he's standing next to the throne of the real Antichrist, which is Osiris or Nimrod. You know what I'm saying? But I've listened to it 3 times. You got to check it out. It will blow your mind.
I brought up the subject of what's going to happen after we take over the government. We become responsible then for administrating, 250 million people. And there was no answers. No one had given any thought to economics. How are you going to clothe and feed these people? The only thing that I could get was that they expected that the Cubans and the North Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Russians would all want to occupy different portions of the United States. They also believed that their immediate responsibility would be to protect against what they called the counter-revolution. And they felt that this counter-revolution could best be guarded against by creating and establishing re-education centers in the Southwest, where we would take all the people who needed to be re-educated into the new way of thinking and teach them how things were going to be. I ask, well, what is going to happen to those people that we can't re-educate, that are die-hard capitalists? And the reply was that they'd have to be eliminated. And when I pursued this further, they estimated that they would have to eliminate 25 million people in these re-education centers. And when I say eliminate, I mean kill. 25 million people. Now, I want you to imagine sitting in a room with 25 people, most of which have graduate degrees from Columbia and other well-known educational centers, and hear them figuring out the logistics for the elimination of 25 million people. And they were dead serious.
Some of the people that were going to the FEMA fusion centers were not to be heard or seen from again. The rescue response for Hurricane Harvey, because somebody encouraged me today to tell my story, and this is a very small piece of the story from what I witnessed on the ground, and I know that a lot of people know that I was there, involved in some of the search and rescue and some other things that were going on. And make sure I'm not covering up my microphone. And I need to tell this story because some of these things are still going on, and they're probably going on in Florida now. And it's very important because this covers what people have considered to be conspiracy theory. It is what people have not been told in the media, and it's the kind of thing that the government and the media covers up so that people don't have an understanding of what's going on. Landed back in Texas on Sunday night and immediately got to work because the hurricane stopped on the coast and then just continued to spin, and was continuing to spin northward along the entire coast when I arrived back in Texas. And so within 24 hours of getting home, I got sleep. I obtained a boat, a truck, gas money, funding, and within 24 hours I was on the road heading from Dallas to Houston. And when I arrived in Houston, I was contacted by one of my militia brothers out of Texas, and where some of the guys were set up. I got to Houston about midnight that first night, and when I rolled through, the militia had taken over a liquor warehouse that was in basically like a strip mall. And the back of the strip mall had a fence on the back side of it, which gave them operational security because they had boundaries and borders. They took over the whole alleyway and had guys on the roof and were able to secure their position and where they were at. And I quickly found a place that we were able to bed down, have a safe place. And the first thing that I noticed there, that it was like the purge. All I could hear that night was car alarms going off and glass breaking and gunshots. Luckily, I was able to bed down and get things ready and unpack my guns and ammunition, and I got zero sleep that first night. We made our way down to Katy, Texas, and when we got there, we were stopped because they had finally blocked the roads down, and we were just off of I-10 where they had FEMA, National Guard, DEA, FBI, Secret Service. They had emergency management from Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, and others there. And it was a big clusterfuck of everybody sticking their thumbs up each other's asses because they were just running around like not doing anything but stroking each other, because that was happening down there. I think it's still happening down there. Some of the homeless people were freaked out. Thomas Jefferson High School in Port Arthur had a lot of people evacuated by plane, and there was at least 1,500 that were left behind that refused to get on the FEMA planes because they said that they were not making their destinations. They were not showing up in certain areas. And those people, I don't know where they were going. The 1,500 that were there, we sent a security force over to, because they almost started rioting at the Thomas Jefferson High School in Port Arthur because of the way they were being treated. And again, I'm going to tell people, we've talked about this for years, for fucking years. We talked about this. Don't go to the FEMA centers. This shit's very real. I just experienced it firsthand, and I've come home to decompress over these issues. 11 p.m. was scheduled to be the release of the blowing of the dam, and at least 3 of the rescuers that I talked to said that the dam had started to fail, and there was a moon-shaped spot in the top of it where water had been coming over and been washing part of the dam away. So people were saved. We rallied back at the Crossing Church, where they basically wrapped everything up for today, and they told the stories of what had been happening. At least one boat had been in another neighborhood and pulled out at least 100 people themselves from that area. And let me tell you something. These stories that you're seeing on CNN and Fox News and stuff about government officials going out on boats and pulling people in and rescuing them were designed as propaganda to let you know that the government was taking care of you, when in all actuality they were not doing evacuations. They were locking down the highways, they were locking down these neighborhoods, and they were going to flood these people in their homes. But if you hear part of the background story of what was actually going on down there, then it brings credence to those who put out some of these theories, because they have read the FEMA papers or they have read the government documents into these things. And what has brought this up today for me to finally discuss this openly is the fact that FEMA is trying to put their prison ships out at Port Arthur, Texas, to give a place for people to live because their homes have been destroyed or whatever. I later found out that even though we were stopped at this FEMA resource center and this government makeshift resource center at the mall, and let me tell you, and you'll get part of this out of my story, that they do use malls, they do use Walmarts, they do use these other places to set up FEMA and to create FEMA centers in these natural disasters. I saw it firsthand. Some of the people that were going to the FEMA fusion centers were not to be heard or seen from again. I got the rundown from the militia that night about other things that were going on, and I couldn't talk about it at the time because of operational security, but now I'm in the Ozark Mountains. I'm back in Missouri for a minute, and I'm in a little better place to actually be able to tell this story. I do have some pictures and some videos to verify some of the things that I'm talking about, or the fact that I was even there. For the most part, I didn't get to videotape a lot of the things that I wanted to because of security at the time, and because of on Facebook and social media, I was talking about supplies and helping out people, but the very reality of the fact was I was using those boats and I was using those people and those supplies to make sure that armed militia were going in, and I believe wholeheartedly that we stopped a gun confiscation, and we stopped them from murdering a lot of people. And the only reason why Hurricane Harvey was not Katrina was because of the Cajun Navy, the Texas Navy, and the response from Texans on their own soil that was saving tens of thousands of lives that I witnessed firsthand, while the government was locking down roads and barricading people from being able to help. Within 24 hours, I had more than $50,000 to $100,000 worth of supplies showing up on trucks, along with over 100 armed men and women and medics and corpsmen and people who are not your bullshit militia spouting keyboard warriors that you see on the internet all the time. These are guys who are hardcore motherfuckers that were ready to go in to these little towns and these neighborhoods where they were not doing evacuations, that they were flooding, and preparing. FEMA and other people were flooding these small towns without doing evacuations and didn't care if people were dying. See, when you have something like a disaster happen, like a hurricane, and many of us have talked about shit hit the fan in our YouTube videos for many years and about preparedness, and it's very important to know that within the first couple days of one of these disasters, that money doesn't matter anymore. What does matter, water, food, ammunition, guns, and the things that you're going to need for survival. By the time I was told that we needed to disarm, I had at least 40 people there armed. AKs, ARs, sidearms, and I started putting a plan together, and I'll just put it this way. I called Murdoch Pisgatti, the president of my organization, on the last day, which I'm going to get to this in a minute, and I told him, I've been busted, and I got to tell you what I was doing, because it might come back on you, because you're the one sending me aid down here. But I was not just trying to put boats in the water. I was not just trying to bring supplies and aid in from other parts of Texas and across the country. What I was doing is I was using the old tactic that we see the government using in saying that we were doing humanitarian aid runs. But on those humanitarian aid runs of ships full of food and medical supplies, I was putting at least 4 to 5 armed men or women team members in boats to get them over into the Golden and Vidor areas and the Port Arthur areas, so that we had armed militia in those areas to protect Texans and also help pull them out. The private contractors came in, tried to disarm us, tried to take over our supplies, and I wasn't having any of it. The guy that was working with me hand in hand started carrying around an ice pick because the contractor had threatened his life, and he was ready to stab this guy in his neck because he straight up threatened our lives. I had my 357 on my hip the whole time that I was there, and this contractor was talking to us about open carrying and scaring people, but the real reality is they were trying to control the situation and take over, for whatever reason, supplies and get those armed men out of there. And he tried to take my 357 off my hip, in which case my retention skills that I've done, whether the open carry movement or my training in other areas I'm not going to talk about, I put my elbow directly on my gun as soon as he tried to grab it, smacked his arm away, and had to inform him I was going to shoot him in his head if he tried to touch my gun again, because they were trying to take over and threaten our operation of protecting Texans so that they could get away with whatever they were getting away with, hiding bodies, covering up things that were going on. Some of the neighborhoods that those guys were going into were the richest neighborhoods and were involved in, I believe, government looting or private contractor looting. So we slept in the back corner of the pastor's office that night, and the next morning we had already had everything set up, and we got up and we sent everybody out in 8 to 10 different directions where they couldn't be followed, and they went to their respective places, to these small towns in these areas, and we got the supplies there. We got the armed militia into these areas to protect Texans, and they continued that as I left town and went back to Dallas. My mission at that point in time, after 5 days, was basically over, and I left and got out of the area. The first night that I was there, we had at least one team that was not part of the militia. They were there, I think, as adjutants, and I personally heard them talking about hunting people. And there were people down there that were hunting people. They were not hunting deer, they were not hunting boar, they were not hunting pigs, they were hunting people. I think some of them believed that they were hunting looters, but as I said earlier, after a day or two of being in shit at the fan in a situation where there's no water, no food, your most moralistic person might go into your neighbor's house and try and find food and water for survival. So at this point in time, you have people who aren't necessarily looters, but people who are just trying to survive, and if they looked like looters, they were being shot. They were hunting people. By that night, I had 100 to 150 very tacked out armed teams ready to protect Texans. Ready to go into these small towns and these neighborhoods and make sure that people were not getting locked in, make sure they were getting aid coming into them, and making sure that the government was not allowing people to be killed, whether it was by the release of these dams and the flooding for a second time, not from the hurricane, but they were flooding these areas for a second time. And my security guy informed me that what they were doing was basically flushing the toilet on Port Arthur, and the bodies that they had seen from the hurricane, whether they were full of bullet holes or whether they were just flood victims, were not there during the second flooding. They had not been collected, they were being washed out to sea. Those bodies are not being recorded in the body counts that are happening down there. And now that FEMA and National Guard took over and suspended all rescue operations, people are, they're bringing in prison ships. And I'm going to tell you right now, do not get on their fucking prison ships, because you might not come back. They're allowing the sharks and the fish to eat the bodies that go out to sea, just like they did in Hurricane Katrina. And with millions of people being displaced from their homes and their neighborhoods, you might go missing forever, and they think that you just bugged out and went somewhere else in the country and can't find you. But a lot of these people are going out to sea and never coming back. I was told by the militia guys that they had worked with federal agents at the ATF to secure many of the gun stores in the area, because they were very worried about how many gun stores Houston has, and they wanted to make sure that the gangs weren't breaking in and taking these guns out and being able to use them. And we met up with the Cajun and Texas Navy guys. When I got to the Woodlands, I think it was called the Crossing Church in the Woodlands is where they were set up. I could tell they had a very well put together rescue mission going on with lots of computers and maps and other things, and they were dispatching people to many different locations in different areas. The guys that were running this were obviously pros at what they were doing, and obviously had connections with many other people, because as soon as they gave us a chance to get our boats out there and start going on rescue missions, we heard that there was some really bad looting going on. One of the stories that we heard of was like Grand Theft Auto. Somebody was on a jet ski with pistols in both hands, like firing their guns into people's homes in the Katy area. And DPS showed up. That's Department of Public Safety. For those of you who don't understand, that is basically the Highway Patrol of Texas. And they were putting a DPS agent on every boat and every car going out to do these rescues. The DPS agent that rode with me for several hours was a member of CID, which is Criminal Investigation Detectives or Criminal Investigation Units. And they wanted to make sure that we had our guns with us. So I had a Highway Patrol chick in my car as we were dispatched to go out, and was told to grab my AK-47 and have my pistol on my hip because of what they were involved in. Now, at the time, I didn't realize why DPS was being put on every boat and every truck. We later found out that the reason DPS was with us and wanted to make sure we were armed was because at least one of those gun stores had been taken over, and there was some pretty hardcore gang members that were using the arms that they had gotten to go and loot and rob people. They were stealing boats from people in the Cajun Texas Navy. They were dressing up like rescuers, and when people would answer their door to get rescued, they were robbing them and going in their homes. There were people that were being shot and murdered. And they put the DPS agents and detectives on our boats and on our cars because they were hunting gang members. Like I said, the immediate hours and few days after a disaster, it's lawlessness, it's shit at the fan, and there is no law and order, and things get crazy. And that's another reason why you want to be prepared and have arms in your home and everywhere else. Told these federal agents to get out of their way because they were going in to save Texans. Everybody went home for the night and got some rest, and were scheduled to come back at sunrise to go again. And by the time we got back the next morning, they started dispatching people to the Beaumont-Port Arthur area. That is when a member of the State Department came in, and basically he laid it out like this: we don't want to have a war zone. We need to get people in there to do rescues. They're not allowing anybody to get into this area, so you're going to follow me, It's normally an hour drive. It's going to take us 4 hours to get there because the roads are so flooded that we have to go on all these different county roads and back ways to get there. So we followed this member of the State Department under, he led at least 30 trucks and boats to the Beaumont area. When we get to Beaumont, we get past all of the roadblocks, we get past everything, and we show up at a church. And then he filled us in on what was going on, and they called it Templar 1. That was the mission we were on, was Templar 1. So we go from there, and the pastor prays over us, and we go out from that spot. And we head over to the local Walmart and Academy store where they were setting up the FEMA Fusion Center and makeshift hospital, and they had a helipad there to be able to do rescues and stuff. So they were using the Walmart stores, and they were using the parking lots there and stuff. There were already lines lining up at the Walmart stores that were at least 2 miles long, and people were being rationed 1 case of water, 1 loaf of bread. It was very socialistically done. This is how FEMA works things. They don't always give people what they need. They just give them little pieces here and there. And it's done in a systematically government-controlled socialistic way. And basically there was bread lines forming, and that's exactly what was happening there at that FEMA center. We rallied there and met up with some other first responders, where we finally took another convoy down into the downtown Beaumont area on a very crazy ride, where we had people on the highway trying to break up our convoy and trying to wreck into our cars, and we're pulling boats. Like, this is not the best thing for us to be involved in, with people trying to run us off the road while we're in a convoy. But there was obviously people that were trying to break up the convoy. I was able to keep it close to the head of the line of the civilians that were involved in this operation and bringing boats in, because they didn't have the resources to do what they needed to do. It was such a wide destruction area. We get into downtown Beaumont, and we station in this big parking lot in the middle of downtown, and this is where the State Department official rallied us all together, and he said, "I'm not here. I was never here. I never got you guys in here. But now you're on your own, and here's the scenario. They're getting ready to release the dam here, and within the next hour, you're going to be under 4 foot of water. Find high ground, you're on your own." They left us there to die. They left us there to drown. They didn't give any more information than that. And a bunch of the people in our crews, including police and veterans, are the ones that lost their minds because they didn't have direction and they didn't have anybody give them confirmation on what they were supposed to do, and so they started freaking out. So we started setting up shop. Half the veterans and police freaked out and decided they wanted to go to the local Holiday Inn so they'd have beds and showers and stuff. The other half of us stayed at the church and started putting together basically our own fusion center. And this fusion center that we put together in 48 hours, we put together a small medic hospital. We had nurses, militia, and other people there. And we were not taking in refugees. This was only for search and rescue. And I immediately started using my resources with Don't Comply and the Open Carry Movement and militia and other people that I know across the board to start bringing in supplies. What I was not telling people on social media was the fact that we were also warned by these guys that they were getting ready to do gun confiscations on the Texas coast in Beaumont and Port Arthur. They had already been having lots of looting and lots of they were having gunfights. There were people being murdered. Our guys started bringing in reports of lots of bodies being in the water. And the body count that's being talked about in Texas is not in the 60s. It's probably more like in the thousands. Because they didn't recover any of these bodies before they released the water from the dam. So what happened was when they released the water from the dam, those bodies were being washed out to sea. And my security advisor that was there as I was putting together our own militia fusion center was giving me reports back from their boats and from the people that were in the water of bodies that they were seeing with bullet holes in them. They would simply tag these bodies around their ankle or around their wrist and leave them in the water, because when you're in search and rescue, it's a biohazard to bring a dead body onto your boat, and you basically GPS mark where they're at, and later on they can be recovered after the flooding, because we were there to pull out live bodies out of the water and out of these neighborhoods. But what I was told by local officials and by the State Department official that was there with us was that they were going to be doing gun confiscations because of the violence that had been happening in that area. And I think we all know from Katrina and other things that gun confiscations not only is not going to fucking happen in Texas, it's not going to happen again because of life safety, because of life safety. By the next morning, I had trucks and militia rolling in. So now we're going into the 4th or 5th day that I was down there. I was only sleeping about an hour a night, just enough to, not be in sleep deprivation and being able to keep my mind sane. And by the afternoon, I had probably about 75 armed men and women, not including the ones that were already out in the water doing rescues, and was continuing to make the call for supplies. So we had about $50,000 to $100,000 worth of supplies show up in the form of medical supplies, food, water, and all these different things. 100 to 150 very tacked out, very capable armed militiamen. And these, like I said, these are not the people that you see bullshitting on the internet. These are actual 3%ers that showed up and were about it and ready to go. About 3 o'clock in the morning on the last night that I was there, private contractors showed up, and they were very angry about some of the things that were going on. They demanded that I hand over those supplies and that I disperse my men and women that were there for the safety of Texans. And I refused. And I told him very strictly to his face that you're not going to tell me to disarm. I've been a part of the open carry movement. I was PR director of a very large organization, and if he was going to threaten me in that manner, I would make a very quick phone call and make sure that 1,000 armed people showed up and were ready to continue the job that we were doing. So I started making a call out for supplies. My call out for supplies was not just for supplies, and the people that I'm involved with understand that I needed armed men there. We were approached by local officials who, the police and others, who told us that we were not allowed to have guns, we were not allowed to be armed while we were there, and that they were going to come and take our guns and not allow us to be a part of that. So those of you who don't understand right now, there is a civil war happening in this country, and I saw it firsthand on the Texas coast. There are federal officials who were there who were wanting to lock down roads and wanting to wash these bodies out to sea, and there were government officials there that were supporting us in the life safety of saving Texans' lives, pulling them out of their neighborhoods and making sure that they were getting supplies and safety and medical attention. And there were those who were trying to control the situation and lock it down. That first night that I was there, I was doing everything I could to use this facility that we had And I had realized that the dam that they were releasing was one river over from us, and had the flooding come over to our area, it was going to hit this other river and was still going to wash out to Port Arthur. So I knew we were on dry ground. I knew we were in a safe location. We started setting up shop there. Half of our guys left, ended up chasing their tails for the night, because you can't always put your boats into the raging flood waters. It'll wash your boat out, and it's not safe unless you have the right size motor. But the right size motor for those situations in 4 foot of water with cars and debris and everything else is not the ideal situation. You'll wreck your boat, you'll capsize, and you'll be stuck in the flood waters and become somebody who needs to be rescued also. Taking over supply routes and supply chains of Texans who were sending aid and sending people, and they were confiscating it. And like I said in the beginning of the video, it was, I think half of it was because there were people there to do bad deeds, and I think that there were people there who, instead of being caught up in that, would rather lock the roads down and not let you get cameras in and not let you get the stories out, so that it doesn't look bad on their record when it comes down. They were allowing bodies to be washed out to sea, because it's better to let that happen and then be missing persons instead of another body count on their local county or their area. After about 72 hours of not having water or food, somebody who is highly moralistic, like a pastor or somebody, would very quickly resort to robbery or theft or hurting somebody else to make sure that they had a way to live. You go back to your carnal nature of survival. I've been through a lot of things, even with the open carry movement, that I have risked my life over the years, but I'm already a dead man. And I know I'm going to die one day, and my soul's redeemed, so it doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is doing the right thing and letting people know what's actually going on.